these lectures archived? Will they be archived? They will.
Yeah, so, because I've got everyone's email address, there's a YouTube channel, which is just, it's like @holy. And so once I've got time to chop them into bits and upload them, they'll be there.
2-minute warning, everyone. 2-minute warning. And while you're waiting, we can just give a little bit of your attention to the music that has been played and come back on again because it's going to be referred to in this presentation. Hello and welcome back for this afternoon session of Holy Moods. Before I go any further, I went and checked over in the parking lot, and some people had little cards put on their cars saying, your car has not been registered, blah, blah, blah. I have full permission to tell you, you can ignore that entirely. That is not anything that you need to worry about. Please do not feel like you've been suckered in to pay some kind of fine. You're fine, you're safe. Shh. Okay, so let us carry on, and we'll dive straight in, and I would like to introduce Brian McGreevy to you. And as well, so you're aware, Brian is one of the co-conspirators who we've been talking through this, and light and high beauty as a theme, that was his suggestion. And so praise and blame go to him. The Reverend Brian K. McGreevy is assistant to the rector at St. Philip's Anglican Church in Charleston. Reverend McGreevy teaches and speaks regularly on C.S. Lewis and the Inklings, and has led several study tours to the UK focusing on Lewis, Tolkien, and the Inklings. He was a participant in the Wycliffe Hall, University of Oxford 2025 Summer School in Theology, which was titled Undoing the Spell, C.S. Lewis and the Undeceiving of Our Generation. I just like saying things twice, but that's a great title, C.S. Lewis and the Undeceiving of Our Generation. That was led by Professors Alistair McGrath and Simon Horobin. His podcasts on Lewis's works are followed by thousands of listeners, and he served as the co-organizer of the 2023 Mere Anglicanism Conference, which was telling a more beautiful story, lessons from C.S. Lewis on reaching a fractured world. And that's the largest Lewis conference ever held, with over 900 attendees. He's married to the former Jane Hollis Whitney, and they have 4 children and 4 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian McGreevy.
Thank you so much. Anything you enjoy at this Tolkien conference is because of David, and I will take the blame for anything else. So I am delighted to be with you today and very excited for this topic where we are going to be doing the bird's eye view with the bird flying pretty fast because we're going to try to pull together some things that I don't really think have been pulled together very often, but I think need to be pulled together to help us to understand a little bit more about some of the foundations of the legendarium. So as you noticed on the program, the topic is Eärendil, the Morning Star, and then the subtitle, The Book of Ishnis and Kenilworth and the Theological Formation of the Legendarium, which is a mouthful. But I would suggest to you that these things are intricately and intimately connected, and when you see some of the lines of connection, it is very exciting. So, just to begin, I want to give a huge shout out to Tolkien scholars John Garth, Catherine McElwain, and Holly Ordway for their work. And I also want to commend to you, next time you need to treat yourself for a present, if you did not get to go to the Tolkien exhibition that was at the Bodleian and then at the Morgan Library maybe 8 or 10 years ago, the book from the exhibition that's called Tolkien, Maker of Middle-earth is absolutely fabulous. A lot of exhibition books are not fabulous. This one is fabulous, so please go and buy that. So we're going to start with a little bit of background of Tolkien coming up to Exeter College, Oxford, from King Edward's School. And part of why this is important is that I want us to try to get an idea of Tolkien the young man. Tolkien just having graduated from this prep school and coming up to Oxford, and what his life, what his surroundings were like, because I think all of that is really important in what happened and led him into this Middle-earth idea. And the music that we were just listening to is a rendition of one of the O antiphons that is called O Oriens, which is the fifth of the O antiphons, and I'm going to come back to those in just a moment. So if you know much about Tolkien, which I think all of you do, it will not have escaped you that even though the biopic a few years ago hardly mentioned the fact that Tolkien was Catholic, that Tolkien was deeply, deeply imbued in the Catholic faith, and his life really revolved around it. In fact, I think a helpful construct to understand Tolkien in this period is to think of him almost as a lay brother or a novice in a Catholic community, because he was really deeply involved. And after his mother died and he was an orphan, he was essentially a ward of the priest of the Birmingham Oratory, particularly Father Morgan, but he was with them every day. He vacationed with them. They were kind of the framework of his life. And one of the things that Tolkien said in his 306th letter was that every morning before school, he served Mass as an altar boy. And he had memorized the Latin Mass. Remember, at this point, that was all there was. The Mass was only in Latin. And he went every day. And the Birmingham Oratory, which we heard a few references to St. Philip Neri and St. John Henry Newman, was founded by John Henry Newman after he left Anglicanism and went over to the Roman Catholic faith. But part of that oratory's tradition is as a hugely strong liturgical and musical tradition where there is great emphasis on beautiful worship. And so Tolkien was surrounded by that, and he was surrounded by chant, he was surrounded by liturgy, he was surrounded by this music. And the music that we heard was a setting of O Oriens, that Latin antiphon from the O antiphon sung by the chorus of Pembroke College, which of course is where Tolkien was a professor when he first came to Oxford, a professor of Anglo-Saxon. So King Edward's School, where Tolkien went before Oxford, was part of the Anglo-Catholic wing of the Church of England. And one of its alumni was Edward Burne-Jones. And we're going to have a little side trail on the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, which we don't have time to fully explore. But I would commend you to learn more about them, because they were hugely influential on Tolkien. And this is a whole group of artists and writers who had sort of the same aim as the TCBS, Tolkien's Tea Club and Barovian Society in high school, pushing back against the secularization of culture and embracing beauty. So Edward Burne-Jones had been at King Edward School, And along with William Morris, he helped found the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. They were very influenced by another artist very well known in Oxford, John Ruskin, and their influence was very strong at King Edward's. And Tolkien talks about the fact that he and the other members of the TCBS were inspired by the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood and their embrace of beauty, particularly in every aspect of life, and that it was a way to rebel against what Tolkien called a culture that has no heart. So, interestingly, Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris were both students at Exeter College, and I think that had something to do with Tolkien choosing to go there. It continued to have a strong Anglo-Catholic tone, architecture by G.G. Scott, modeled after Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, more Catholics than any other Oxford college. The tapestry done by Burne-Jones and Morris of the Adoration of the Magi still hangs in the chapel at Exeter College, and their most famous collaboration was the Arthurian frescoes of the Oxford Union, where Tolkien used to go and study. So he's imbued with this environment. It is all around him. It's in the built environment. It's in what he's hearing at Mass. It's in what people are talking about. It is in the architecture. It is in all of these things. So Tolkien, in 1911, coming up to Exeter, is in the midst of a very fecund, intellectual, creative, artistic, and Catholic ethos, living in the middle of an ancient and beautiful cloistered campus right in the heart of Oxford. And that is not to be dismissed when you think about how he came to write these stories. So just a couple of pictures. You can see up in the corner the bearded men, Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris, obviously a little after the time they were at Exeter College. And then you can see Tolkien is the one in color there. That is from his freshman year. That is his dear friend and later roommate, Colin Cullis. Next to him, Colin Cullis, like so many of Tolkien's friends, would die, not in World War I, but at age 25 from a heart failure. The tapestry from Exeter College is right there. You can see the beauty of that. You will also notice there's light in there. That's not an accident that we see an angel bearing a light. You can see the Oxford Union and the frescoes that are underneath that magnificent ceiling. And then the bottom picture is the chapel at Exeter College and the old quad there. So the Book of Ishness, what a great name. The Book of Ishness is a hardbound sketchbook that Tolkien used for his artwork and some of his artistic writing from 1914 to 1928. So starting during the time he was at Exeter. And he has a little envelope that was always kept in there called Earliest Ishnesses, which includes some other artwork that's a bit earlier. One of the things that a lot of people do not appreciate about Tolkien was that he was a genius artist. If you had gone to this exhibition, did any of you go to that? Well, let me just describe how you entered it, both in Oxford and when it was in New York City. They had recreated Tolkien's painting of Hobbiton on the Hill, and you walked on this path, and you came up a big ramp, and then there was the door and exterior of Bag End, and you went in through this green door into the exhibition. It was glorious. But fully half of the exhibition was Tolkien's artwork, which is really underappreciated. But anyway, one of the things in this Book of Ishness, which you can see in the picture, is that Tolkien and his sister Mary had a conversation linking these Ishnesses with John Ruskin, the art critic and reformer, who was the champion of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. And Ruskin very famously said that imagination was the highest faculty of the artist and the poet. And this goes right with Tolkien's idea of subcreation, and that part of what it means to be made in the image of God is you were made by a maker to be a maker. The same idea Dorothy Sayers picks up in The Mind of the Maker. So that's very much on Tolkien's mind. And so in this book, Tolkien is attempting to express through art that is often abstract in nature, moods and emotions and what was going on in his imagination. And it's fascinating. Some of the sketches have titles like Under-Tenishness, Grown-Upishness, Wickedness, Eeriness. And the style in the Book of Ishness is very interesting because it's much more abstract and impressionistic. Tolkien was a very fine, detail-oriented, representational artist. We'll see some examples of that in a minute. But he could also go into this very imaginary world where light and color are hugely important. So you'll see here on the left side, there's a sketch from 1911 when Tolkien had just come up to Exeter of Turl Street, the street that the Porter's Lodge opens onto at Exeter College. And you can see he's got a very fine sense of proportion, scale, perspective, all of that. But then you can see these Ishnesses are a totally different style. And Under-Tenishness is really not representational. I love Eeriness because if you look at it closely, it really looks like Gandalf from the back, very early on there in 1914. And then Water, Wind, and Sand, which was inspired by a visit to the Lizard Peninsula in Cornwall when Tolkien was on vacation with one of the priests from the oratory. So the O antiphons. If you don't know about the O antiphons, I'm actually kind of jealous because they are such a glorious thing to discover. The O antiphons are one of the great treasures of liturgical music, and no one knows exactly how old they are. We're pretty confident that they date back at least to the 8th century. Probably we're pretty confident that they go back at least to the 6th century. They may be older than that. Some people see a reference to them in Boethius and the Consolation of Philosophy. And they are a beautiful musical way of anticipating the incarnation during the season of Advent leading up to Christmas. And so they have been chanted for years in the days leading up to Christmas. And Tolkien probably would have memorized all of these because he would have heard them every year at Mass, going as a small boy and then on up through Exeter. And they're most widely known today through the hymn, O Come, Emmanuel. The verses are the English translation of those O antiphons. And they are called the O antiphons, not surprisingly, because each one of them begins with O, which is sung. And so they are all referring to different scriptural attributes of Jesus Christ. And they're usually ordered as follows: O Sapientia, wisdom; O Adonai, Lord; O Radix Jesse, root of Jesse; O Clavis David, O key of David; O Oriens, O morning star; O Rex Gentium, O King of the nations; O Emmanuel, God with us. And the full antiphon for O Oriens is O Oriens splendor lucis aeternae et sol justitiae veni et illumina sedentes in tenebris et umbra mortis. O morning star, splendor of light, eternal sun of righteousness, come and enlighten those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death. Now keep in mind, Tolkien has this memorized. This is part of his soul. And as Christmas comes each year, he is anticipating Jesus' birth with this antiphon. And look at the imagery of that and think about the legendarium. That is not a coincidence. So that brings us to Cynewulf, Christ One, and the Exeter book. Cynewulf was a very gifted 8th or 9th century poet who wrote in Old English, and to whom Christ One, the poetic theological meditation on the O antiphons, is usually ascribed, along with Christ Two and Christ Three. And it's found in a manuscript from the famous Exeter book, which is down at the bottom of that slide, which is a codex that was compiled in the 10th century, and it is housed at Exeter Cathedral in the UK. It still comes out from time to time where you can get a glimpse of it. It is beautiful to just look at the script in this. It's all hand-done script. And one of the things that is so interesting is the O antiphons were clearly so well known by the 8th century in the English church that they had translated them out of Latin into Old English and had poetic and musical versions of this. Now, those of you that were taught in school that Beowulf couldn't possibly be remotely related to Christianity because Christianity didn't come to England till much later, this proves that you were taught wrong. So sorry. So there is this little excerpt here, and I'm going to have us do a little participatory exercise of speaking Old English. So I want you to look at that top line of the poem in Old English, which starts off Eärendil, and then in the middle, under the pictures, there is my own sort of phonetic way of saying this. And so I'm going to say it, and then you all are going to join in and say it with me. So here we go. Eärendil, angle berstast, over middenjerd monum sanded. All right, are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Eärendil, angle berstast, over middenjerd monum sanded. And the reason I wanted you to do that is because of what attracted Tolkien to this passage. Tolkien, of course, would have known the O antiphons already. And then when he came across an Old English version, remember Tolkien loved Old English, passionate about the language and the words and their sound. And when he found this Old English version of something that was already in his heart, he was deeply moved by that. So basically what this rendition translates as, it is a meditation on Jesus Christ, the morning star. The morning star is an image that's used about Jesus, as we'll see in a moment. And what this translates to is the following. O Eärendil, brightest of angels, sent to mankind over Middle Earth, righteous sons, radiant, splendid above all stars, of thine own self thou ever enlightenest every age, as thou, God, born of God, long ago, son of the true Father, eternally existed without beginning in the glory of heaven, so thine own creation cry with confidence to thee now for their needs, that thou send that bright sun to us, and come thyself to lighten those who have long lived, surrounded by shadows and darkness, here in everlasting night, where shrouded by sins have had to endure death's dark shadow. I would love to spend an hour talking about how all of that relates to the Lord of the Rings, but I won't. So some scripture. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to give you this testimony for the churches. I am the root and offspring of David and the bright morning star. We actually heard that voice speaking from heaven while we were with him on this sacred mountain. This is Transfiguration. The word of prophecy was fulfilled in our hearing. You should give that word your closest attention, for it shines like a lamp amidst all the dirt and darkness of the world until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. And then from Revelation, Jesus speaking, to the one who is victorious, who carries out my work to the end, I will give authority over the nations, just as I myself have received authority from my Father, and I will give him the morning star. So the pivotal moment, Exeter College, summer 1914. June 1914, Exeter celebrated its 600th anniversary. This just reminds me of my friends that make fun of me for one of the things I majored in college was American history, and they say, how can you major in that? It's so short. So 600th anniversary, Tolkien is there for the celebration. You can see that picture of him that year at Exeter when he was part of the rugby team. This is their informal rugby picture. I commend to you John Garth's little monograph, Tolkien at Exeter College, which is where this picture came from, full of really fun little details. So summer 1914, this anniversary celebration happens. Tolkien is spending a lot of time in that beautiful library that's pictured there, which is the Exeter Library. And they have very complete records, so they can tell you everything Tolkien checked out the whole time he was there. And one of the things that was discovered was that several volumes were checked out in June 1914, including a volume of Anglo-Saxon poetry that included Christ One. And he was entranced by this. Just as I said, it resonated with his heart because the Latin of that was already there from these antiphons. And so this line about Eärendil, the morning star, he just loved. And then he checked out another book and saw once again this word Eärendil, but they're associated in German philology with the idea of a heroic mariner, sort of a half-man, half-divine heroic mariner bringing light across the dark sky. So Tolkien reflects on this in the Notion Club Papers, which is that unpublished work that he wrote later that is sort of depicting life among the Inklings. And he says in that on the character that's Tolkien in the Notion Club, says he saw this line about Eärendil and he felt a curious thrill, as if something had stirred in me. There was something very remote and strange and beautiful behind these words, if I could grasp it, far beyond the ancient English. And it's not just the words themselves, it's the sound of the words, the way that the words look in that beautiful script, and what those words mean, and all of the resonances that they have in Tolkien's heart. But the other thing that's so interesting is the very next line in this source is the term Middle Earth, Midden-Jerd. Middle Earth, keeping watch over Middle Earth, in this poem celebrating Jesus Christ and his incarnation in song. So beauty, music, truth, scripture, gospel, liturgy, all in those two little lines. And when Tolkien read them, there was an explosion in his soul. So Tolkien's early biographer, Humphrey Carpenter, who I could pick a lot of bones with, there are a lot of things that are not great in that biography. Holly Ordway will fix you up if you need to get better information. But he's exactly right about this, and this is important, how these lines were still in the forefront of Tolkien's mind. In 1914, Tolkien spent a holiday in Cornwall, staying on the Lizard Peninsula with Father Vincent Reid of the Birmingham Oratory. At the end of the long vacation, he traveled to Nottinghamshire to stay for a few days on the farm his Aunt Jane was running with the Brooksmiths and his brother Hilary. While at the farm, he wrote a poem. It was headed with the line from Kenilworth's Christ that had so fascinated him several months earlier, Eala Eärendil, Engle Beerstast. Its title was The Voyage of Eärendil, the Evening Star, and it began as follows. Eärendil sprang up from the ocean's cup in the gloom of the midworld's rim. From the door of night as a ray of light leapt over the twilight brim, and launching its bark like a silver spark from the gold fading sand, down the sunlit breadth of day's fiery death, he sped from Westerland. And the succeeding verses describe the starship's voyage across the firmament, a progress that continues until the morning light blots out all sight of it. This notion of the star mariner whose ship leaps into the sky had grown from the reference to Eärendil and the Kenilworth lines, but the poem that it produced was entirely original. It was in fact the beginning of Tolkien's own mythology. And remember that picture that we saw a little earlier that was about sand and water. This is the same picture, also painted by Tolkien in a representational style of the Lizard Cove there in Cornwall. So Tolkien kept on going with this idea, and then he continued in another poem, The Shores of Faery, East of the Moon, West of the Sun. That's the first poem of his mythology. Written around May 1915, Eärendil appears here as the lonely mariner, the one sent out, the only sentient being in the beautiful but empty land. The white city of the elves on the hill of Kor is deserted, and the only sound is the music of the waves on the golden shore. Eärendil was present in this earliest version of the mythology, the Book of Lost Tales. Here he is the half-elven, half-man, half-elf, think incarnation, half-elven son of Tuor and Idril, who escaped from the sack of Gondolin. Years later, seeking his father, he sailed to the shores of Valinor, the Blessed Realm, only to find it deserted. In The Lord of the Rings, as we've already heard, the phial that Galadriel gives Frodo contains light from Eärendil's star. That is no accident. Tolkien is deliberately putting the light that is Eärendil's star, the one that represents Jesus, the morning star, in that phial to be the light in dark places. And when Frodo encounters Shelob the spider, he brings out that phial of light and cries, Aya Eärendil Elenion Ankilama, which is left untranslated in the book, and we can think what we want, but then Tolkien did write a letter and tell us that it could be translated as Hail Eärendil, brightest of stars. And if you have Catherine McIlwain's book, she has wonderful pictures of all of these things in them. And it was so great at the exhibit to just be able to walk up and be right next to it and imagine yourself in the room looking over Tolkien's shoulder while he's writing in his marvelous script. So, this line out of the book from Galadriel, and you, ring bearer, she said, turning to Frodo, I come to you last, who are not last in my thoughts. For you, I have prepared this. She held up a small crystal phial. It glittered as she moved it, and rays of white light sprang from her hand. And this phial, she said, has caught the light of Eärendil's star, set amid the waters of my fountain. It will shine still brighter when night is about you. May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. And fast forwarding to Frodo in Shelob's lair, slowly his hand went to his bosom, and slowly he held aloft the phial of Galadriel. For a moment it glimmered, faint as a rising star struggling in heavy earthward mist. And then as its power waxed and hope grew in Frodo's mind, it began to burn and kindled to a silver flame, a minute heart of dazzling light, as though Eärendil himself had come down from the high sunset paths with the last Silmaril upon his brow. The darkness receded from it until it seemed to shine in the center of a globe of airy crystal, and the hand that held it sparkled with white fire. Frodo gazed in wonder at this marvelous gift that he had so long carried, not guessing its full worth and potency. That is beauteous. And it reflects just what we see in John's gospel, Jesus in that great I am statement. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Part of the genius of Tolkien's work is that he's able to bring his full imagination to bear on language and music and art and scripture and liturgy and pull all of it in to his legendarium and do it in such a way that that story moves our hearts and plants longing in them to know more about it. And I want to just close with the way that Tolkien closed that brilliant essay on fairy stories. This story has entered history in the primary world. The desire and aspiration of subcreation has been raised to the fulfillment of creation. The birth of Christ is the eucatastrophe of man's history. The resurrection is the eucatastrophe of the story of the incarnation. This story begins and ends in joy. Such joy has the very taste of primary truth. Otherwise, its name would not be joy. It looks forward or backward to the great eucatastrophe. The Christian joy, the Gloria, is of the same kind, but it preeminently, infinitely, if our capacity were not finite, is high and joyous. But this story is supreme and it is true. Art has been verified. God is the Lord of angels and of men and of elves. Legend and history have met and fused. The Evangelium has not abrogated legends, it has hallowed them. And we see this painting that Tolkien did to go with that poem where we see the light of the sun, the light of the moon, and the lamp on the tower, reminding us that that light of Eärendil is the light of Jesus, the morning star. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Questions, everybody? Where would you like to go with these questions? Who's going to go first? I just wanted to say that picture where he's this place in Cornwall called the Lizard. I've walked around there, and but back then I had no idea that Tolkien had painted it, because this was like
And twice.
Yeah, 15 years ago, whatever. I recognized that I'd been there, and ironically, my family historically on my dad's side is from Exeter, like that's the hometown, and so I feel like I should own what you've been saying, like in a kind of personal way. I like that. Okay, questions. Let's go.
First of all, thank you. That was a lot of fun. And I'm going to bring shame to my fine arts degree and how little I know about what I'm about to ask. But looking at these paintings from Tolkien, I can't help but feel that the style of them, especially the colors and stuff, is reminiscent of what a lot of sort of pop sci-fi art looked like a couple decades later. Are you aware of, artistic movements that Tolkien was practicing in at the time that might have had influence on later artists, or if any might have been influenced by his artwork directly?
That is a really great question, and I will say I do not have a degree in art history, so I would take whatever I say with a grain of salt. But from my study, my sense is that what really influenced Tolkien in that style of art, which was a very conscious departure from his very representational, precise depiction kind of art, was John Ruskin. And this idea, I think he was really, and I think you're right, that what we see a couple of decades later looks sort of like that work of Tolkien's, but I think he is an original in that. I think what he was really trying to do is to think about what is going on in my imagination, what is going on in my heart, what is going on emotionally, and what would that look like if I put it on paper. And you see these resonances of different colors and these different things I read. I was reminded of Galadriel's hair with all of these references to gold and silver and the different colors of the light. But I really do think it was Ruskin and that emphasis on the imagination. And part of Ruskin's deal was breaking loose from this very strict, sort of the same thing that was going on in France with the Academy. When the Impressionists came along, the Academies of Salon of Paris rejected all of the Impressionist work, every single one of them, and said it was not worthy to be included. So they set up their own salon that they called the Salon des Refusés, those who were refused, and they set up their own alternative gallery and exhibition. So I think Ruskin is part of that same kind of idea that there is more to expressive art than just strict representation.
I was just struck when you were talking about Tolkien's early life, and he was surrounded by such art and beauty, and I was just struck by the importance of the church's imagination and the musicality and the artistry and the imaginative thrust of the church, which I think maybe got stamped down a little bit in the Enlightenment, and I don't know if you could. It's almost like Tolkien was at a certain moment of time in which these things came together. And I just wonder if you could speak to just the importance of this art in our life in the church.
Yeah, I think that's such a great comment, and I think Tolkien and Lewis, too, are both great exemplars for this, and it's part of the reason that Lewis loved to refer to himself as a dinosaur, as a medieval man, because there's this idea that you were under the vault of heaven, and that there was great beauty because there was a great designer, and that all of this beauty and all of this art derives from the beauty, truth, and goodness that are united in God. And there's also an element of mystery to that. And you'll notice, if you remember back to that tapestry, that even though this is a work of the pre-Raphaelites, it feels very medieval, not just because it's a tapestry, but because of the way the figures are arranged and the colors and everything else. And Oxford during this period was in the midst of kind of an Anglo-Catholic revival. And to get a taste of that, I would commend to you, if you're as much of a nerd as I am, go home after the conference and go onto YouTube and find the Keble College Oxford Lessons and Carols service from this past year and just watch it. Because Keble College Chapel is sort of the full flower of this whole movement. And they have the great pre-Raphaelite masterpiece, The Light of the World, is in a separate chapel there. But the whole building expresses this. And the way they do that service, it's a huge, tall chapel with all these arches and things. And they have, when they're singing these introductory antiphons, they have choristers way, way up, like near the roof. And so there's sound coming from all over the place and all of these mosaics all over the church. And it is that fullness and richness of art that is part and parcel of Tolkien's vision here. So I think you're exactly right. And I think the more that we can recover that, it's just like that old quotation from Lewis, that you can smuggle any amount of theology beyond the watchful dragons of the mind if you do it through story, and I think we could also say through art. And so it opens ways for people to come who think they know the gospel or maybe have been burned by what they think is the gospel and can't come that way, but they can come through these other paths.
Okay, so I'm speaking as a Latin teacher now. And you kept bringing up, that Tolkien keeps bringing up, rather, the Morning Star. And something that first of all, that's such a unique Christian symbol.
Yes.
And that he returns to it time and again is clearly of great significance. And yet the Latin word for the Morning Star, as I call it, is Lucifer, which also means light bringer. And
yes,
of course, the word Lucifer carries its own cultural baggage, but not at all what Tolkien seems to be pushing. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how that reclamation or how that shift occurs.
Yes, that is actually a fascinating question. And that phrase actually is used in Scripture to refer to Lucifer, to Satan as well. But the general thrust of theology is that he was the, we might say, putative or pretend morning star, that he was trying to be the morning star when he was not, and that he was the brightest, the next brightest of the angels, but because of his pride, he fell, and that Jesus is the true morning star because he did not. But yes, you are exactly right, and that whole idea of that loose, L-U-C, sort of prefix being connected with light is very much the reason that Lucy is named that in the Chronicles of Narnia, besides the fact that she was his goddaughter, but Lewis liked those multiple resonances.
I could be wrong because, truth be told, I am only on the two towers. But when you were mentioning the Morning Star, what do you think is the significance of rather this being used as a common occurrence and more in the dire situations that require it?
As what being used?
Or like rather being used in more common like situations, rather only being used in the dire situations that kind of require it.
Are you talking about the star block?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry.
I think I'm right in saying is the star glass just for when all other lights go out,
the
or is
star
the light
it's,
for all
it's for
circumstances?
always, because it is helping. It is such a great example of in the Psalms where it says, "Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path," and it's the idea that it helps illumine the next step. It may not show you the whole route that you have to go like your GPS does, but it shows you the next step. And that is very much part and parcel of that theological conception of light, Yeah, that's an excellent question. And it's also the idea that's very much like, and I didn't go into all this because it's not really light, but the lembas, the way bread, are with you to sustain you. And there's a whole lot of sacramental overlay with that. But yeah, I think that the file is there all the time to guide you on your journey.
Are we coming to an end of those? I love the range of questions we're having as well. I think you know, good.
Did George MacDonald have any influence on his concepts of light and the usage?
I am sure that he did. Tolkien, I don't know how much MacDonald Tolkien had read at this point. It would be surprising if he had not read at least a little bit. Clearly, he's very familiar with MacDonald when you get to On Fairy Stories. Now, that may have been because Lewis harangued him about it by that point. But I would expect the way that Tolkien was brought up, that he would have encountered some MacDonald along the way, and that these concepts very much resonate with what you see in MacDonald. And when you read things like The Golden Key and look at the use of light and that, there's much glory there.
A question just for me, to finish off, I guess. So we talked about the star glass and a light when all other lights go out. Would you like to just say anything about the role of that kind of Christological light in a place of hopelessness? Like, I feel like there's a sort of, almost, it sounds sort of lame, but like a pastoral application of having that light, not just in a high, distant, mythological way, but something closer.
Yes. Oh, you shouldn't have asked me that. I'm going to really restrain myself here, but I would say that is hugely important, and I think that is one of the great gifts of Tolkien, that was when you are in a place of apparent hopelessness, yet there is light. Yet there's like the passage that immediately comes to my mind in The Lord of the Rings, which isn't about light, but could well be, because it's sort of a manifestation of the same idea of hope in a place where there appears to be no hope, is that when they're going out for that last charge and they know that they're going to be defeated and they see the ships in the distance that they know are bringing the reinforcements from the Black Gate, and they're going to land and they're going to be utterly decimated and nobody is going to be left standing, yet they choose to go forth. And as they are, and it's just like, I think it was Lisa who was saying this, that this idea of Estelle is the idea of a trust that involves action. And so that is exactly what they're doing, hoping against hope. Where there is no hope, every hope is gone. And they see the ships getting closer and closer, and the sails and banners unfurl, and it's Aragorn instead of the host of Mordor. And if you can read that without crying, there's something wrong with you. But I think that is one of the great gifts of Tolkien, that for all of us, to know that there is hope beyond the walls of this world, like there is joy and light beyond the walls of this world. And even when things are at their darkest, there is still light.
Amen. Ladies and gentlemen, Brian McGreevy. Thank you so much. We're going to dive straight on to our next presentation, and after that we'll have a little afternoon break. So let me introduce our next speaker. So